And we are live. Thank you, everyone, for attending our Connecting to Chicago series. My name is Corey Barnes, and I will be your host. I work out of the Office of Multicultural Student Success, and today I have the privilege of interviewing Professor Rick Lee, Professor of Philosophy here at DePaul. How's it going, Rick?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. Happy to be here with you today and learn some cool things about Chicago. So let's get started, if that's okay with you.
Great.
All right. So please tell us about yourself and how you came to DePaul.
Well, so as you said, I'm a professor in the Department of Philosophy. I work mostly on medieval philosophy, and I also do Marx and social and political philosophy. And I came to DePaul in 2002, mostly because I was teaching at Penn State, which is a great university in the middle of nowhere. And I'm a native of Chicago. I was born and raised on the north side of Chicago. And my wife is a photographer, and State College, Pennsylvania is a tiny town in the middle of nowhere. And she said to me, if you ever have a chance to get a job in a real place, why don't you take it? And so DePaul had a job available, and I was happy to move back to the city.
That's really cool. And that's kind of funny, too. Thank you for sharing that. So really want to talk today about the Burnham plan and how you became interested in it. And what is it?
Sure. So I became interested in the plan actually because I decided I wanted to teach a Discover Chicago class. And when I decided to do that, it was too late for me to propose my own. And so I had to teach one that was already on the books. And so I looked through the ones, and this Gigatour, that's the name of my Discover Chicago class, was one of them, and it centers around Burnham's plan. And so I started doing all of this research on why was there a plan, what was going on, where did it come from, and then all sorts of issues around it. So he talks about building new streets and so on. And I thought, like, what happens to the people who were living there? And, when you put a railroad right where someone used to live, like, what does that do to the communities that are there? And so then I started learning about how this kind of infrastructure and urban planning makes the city nice and beautiful and in a certain way livable, but it can also divide communities and organize us in ways we never thought about. And so I keep doing more and more research into the plan, and I find it really interesting. So just to say a little bit about the plan. So it was written in 1908 or 1909. And if you could show my screen, I'll show you a bit about, let me just make that a little bit bigger. That's going to be good enough for our purposes. So this is just a history of population in Chicago. And I really just want to point out that between 1840 and 1890, or even if you go to 1900, within 60 years, the population of the city went from 4,000 people to 1.7 million. And you could see like how quickly this population is growing. Like there are a lot of years in here where the population is doubling every 10 years. And so we can get rid of that slide. I just wanted to show that. And so the problem Burnham had was that all these people were coming and like haphazard buildings were going on. And but then like some things we don't think about a lot, like all of those people are pooping in Chicago. Where does that go? What do you do with that? Or where does the garbage go? So the early way to deal with garbage was you'd throw it in the street and you'd have pigs eat it. Well, when you have 1.7 million people, that's an awful lot of pigs you need to eat your garbage. Also, we were throwing garbage and sewage into the river, which at that time flowed into Lake Michigan, which is where our drinking water came from. And so like we were drinking our poop. And so like 3 times in the history of Chicago, we were overcome by our own crap, literally. And so like these were all the problems that Burnham thought we need to start thinking about this and get organized. So he wanted to make the city more efficient, to have people get around more quickly, to have services provided more efficiently, and to have, he says in the end, a city that's beautiful and dignified.
That is incredible. And yeah, you don't think about like, hey, I'm not sure that I want to necessarily drink my own feces. So,
well, yeah, I mean, you know that you don't want to, but how you could stop it is the problem.
Yeah, that is. Wow, this is fascinating to hear about the plan. Is it a way if students are exploring exploring Chicago for them to essentially either have access to a map, or how can students see the Burnham plan throughout the city?
Well, so there are a lot of resources. You can actually download a PDF of it. It's in the public domain by now. It was published in 1908. The Chicago Historical Museum has a lot of information about the plan. But in terms of seeing it in action, well, let me take a step back. If you could show the slide. So this was, for example, Burnham's vision for what the lakefront would look like. And so you could see over here, this is the entrance to the river. And then it branches off into the South Branch and North Branch. So this is kind of what he wanted the lakefront to look like. And you can begin to see, like, he starts organizing all the streets in a more regular pattern. I'll talk about this in a moment. You can hardly see it here, but there are some diagonal streets that he included in the plan. And so when you look at something like this, or if I think I have this, for example, was, let me make that bigger. This was his design for Michigan Avenue. And so you can begin to see over here, this is the beginning. This is basically Millennium Park these days. The fountain is here. The bean is just off the screen here. And it's pretty remarkable how much of this we still have in the city, that you can, if you know what his plan was about, you can walk around and see this. Sorry, this is bad video. Just one more image quickly. Let's get that a bit bigger. And this was kind of his plan for the organization of roads. He wanted to have these ring roads going around the city, which if you've spent much time in Chicago, you realize that it's really convenient to get from almost anywhere to downtown, but it's really inconvenient to get from somewhere to somewhere that's not downtown. And so he had a plan for this, which we never implemented. But if I can, while we have this slide, and I don't want to get too lectury and boring, but I mean, here's an interesting aspect about like the hidden dimensions of this plan. You notice he has in here all of these streets that go more or less on an angle. And we have some of them. Lincoln Avenue is one, Clark Street, it's not so severe, but it is an angle. On the south side, they have a couple of angled streets. And on the one hand, native Chicagoans know that if you can find an angled street, get on it, because normally that's going to be quicker if you're driving. But also think about this, especially in light of circumstances today. This is a way to move police also around the city really, really quickly. Also fire. But he got this idea from, we can take the slide down. He got this idea from a Parisian designer who designed Paris. His name was Haussmann. And he really did design these angle streets in order to engage in crowd control. Now, also Burnham had, it was his idea to replace the old bridges we had with the bridges that open now. And that's really convenient on the one hand, but notice how we've been using that also for crowd control. So these are things like, I don't know, I nerd out on these kinds of things. And I think like these sometimes unforeseen and sometimes directly planned social and economic, and in Chicago, because of our history, also racial implications of this kind of urban planning.
Wow, that is, I feel like that was a history lesson for me myself. I am also a Chicago native, and when you talked about the diagonal streets, I'm from the west side of Chicago. I thought of Ogden, which is a diagonal street,
Oh yeah,
which I've used my entire life, and not knowing, because I mean there are pros and cons. Like I know Lincoln Ave and things like that, but I've always got confused with the diagonal streets because it's like three intersections, and it's like
right.
why does the light take so long and things like that. But to hear how you talked about how police and first responders are able to get to easily transport through that diagonally, that makes so much sense. And I was just like, wow, the visionary behind the Burnham plan is pretty impressive. And like you said, to still see that it's still relevant, and many of the designs are still here today. It just speaks truth to how much of a visionary he was.
Yeah, and I mean also Paris, for where he got a lot of his ideas from. That was a city that saw a lot of labor unrest, especially in the 1800s. And so I think part of Haussmann's idea was, so if you think about a square block and you think about a labor group, a union, or maybe even less organized labor group, it's pretty easy for them to cut off those streets and prevent police or other military from coming in and claim control of an area. And so if you have angled streets, they can sort of cut into that, and it makes it much more difficult for these labor unrest to take control of neighborhoods in a city.
Very fascinating for sure. So you kind of started to touch on this. Are there any experiences or movements that have happened in this area? I think in this case, by design of the Burnham plan, whether it be equitable or not equitable, that our student viewers would find interesting.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things about Burnham's plan is he doesn't mention people a lot. And I mean, an interesting aspect is that he does think that the people living here need to have open spaces. And so he planned for, I think I have this right, 1 acre of open parkland for every 500 inhabitants. Right now, the city is well under that. And we're helped in that direction a lot by the lakefront, because the lakefront it's one of the largest uninterrupted, publicly accessible shorelines in the world. And so like there's very few private places on Lake Michigan from all the way in the north, the border of Evanston, to all the way on the south side. Almost all of it is publicly accessible. That doesn't mean you can swim there. Not every place has beaches or places to swim, but you can walk along it. So that's a big part of our park system. And then we have some other big ones sort of along the lakefront. Lincoln Park near DePaul is one, Grant Park downtown, and then the South Shore going on the south side. And then, Corey, you said you're from the west side. I live right next to Humboldt Park. So Humboldt Park and Garfield Park on the west side are also two really massive and really beautiful parks. Humboldt Park is gorgeous. So he talks about people in that way, but he almost always divides them into labor and merchants. And that's how he sees people. And he thinks that the workers need to be happy so that they're better workers. But the whole part of the plan was to make it so that goods can get around the city much more efficiently and much more quickly. And that led his planning. And then people were thought about only in terms of they should have a nice city, they should have parks, mostly so that they don't go on strike or create labor unrest. So I think there was a social design much more at that time class-based than having to do with racial distribution throughout the city. That being said, there's a lot of thought these days being done to how, for example, the Dan Ryan Expressway or the Eisenhower Expressway cuts off communities from other communities. So, for example, there's an expressway that basically divides Chinatown from Bridgeport. The Dan Ryan divides one of the oldest African American communities in the country from the traditionally more white European community of Bridgeport. And so people are thinking these days a lot, or think about Pilsen. They have that railroad going right through what should be the middle of Pilsen, but it really does divide Pilsen from other communities. And so there's a lot of thought and discussion these days about how putting infrastructure and urban planning either helps or prohibits communities from actually just physically accessing one another and hanging out with one another and being in public together. I mean, that's another interesting thing. We don't have in Chicago very many open spaces where we as inhabitants could all just get together and we're hanging out together. If you think about cities in Mexico, like Mexico City has these giant plazas all throughout the city where people can just come together and they're hanging out and they're, having fun or arguing politics or whatever. We in Chicago and in the US in general don't have a lot of those opportunities just to hang out and be Chicagoans together. And so these being physically separated and not having the opportunity to hang out together, I think creates opportunities for a lot of misunderstanding. I'll put it that way in the most mild form.
Yeah, and I thank you for saying that. Also, being again a native of Chicago, like understanding the rich history, and I appreciate you kind of unpacking that for folks who may not be aware, right? And understanding how that, like you said, you talked about the infrastructure and how some of this segregation was by design, or much of it, and understanding how it was done infrastructurally, but also with policy. There was a book that I read not too long, I think it was last year, called The Color of Law, that kind of touched on many of these practices. So very interesting. And then I'm a transplant. Ironically, I live in South Shore now. You mentioned South Shore. I've been in South Shore for 3 years now. My wife and I, we actually own a coffee shop in South Shore by the Cultural Center. And
cool.
Yes, what's really cool though is like the community is really proud of the fact that there is lakefront property, right? Or there is the lakefront, right? And that is a place of gathering, right? It's a place where we kind of come together. I know you talked about how there's not necessarily a lot of places for us to congregate. And obviously I think that's by design. You kind of touched on that, but I think about how the lakefront is a place where is often utilized. Obviously times are different right now, but in the summer, right? It's always, you can ride your bike, you can run, people are, out on the beach, there's different activities, you can go to Navy Pier. So there's just so many opportunities. And I did not know that it was one of the largest, or the largest lakefront real estate, like you said, in the world. That is just so cool. Such a fun fact to know.
Yeah,
so
open. I mean, publicly accessible. Yes. But also, okay, so you said you grew up on the West Side. So like where?
My family is from Austin.
Austin
neighborhood, yeah.
So Austin might be a little bit different. Here closer to Humboldt Park, it's interesting to think about like the places in Chicago that are not so convenient, or it's not so convenient to get from here to downtown. And why it is that now these days, a lot of those communities tend economically to be poor and racially tend to be browner or black. And that's not something that was planned, but as more convenient places become gentrified, poor people are forced in more in places that are less convenient. And one of the things I say often in my Discover Chicago class is, it is really expensive to be poor, because now you have to pay more for transportation, and your housing might be cheaper, but a lot of other things are way more expensive. Also, South Shore is a little bit better, but going a little bit west on the south side, a number of those communities, Englewood, for example, are now currently food deserts. There are few or no grocery stores. So now just getting groceries becomes more expensive. And all of this, like some of it wasn't planned, but the compartmentalization of racial, economic, and ethnic communities is very simple in Chicago. And I think, and I'm not saying this as a positive, I hope you could hear my sarcasm. We've made very good use of that in Chicago.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear and understand. And I think it's really interesting to experience it, right? So like if you're a native from Chicago, like this and you've kind of experienced it. So to hear you kind of articulate it for our guest listeners and viewers, it's really cool to see how you posit it. So thank you. What do you love about Chicago?
I think, and this is one of the positive aspects of Burnham's plan. I think that for a city, I mean, we've been losing population pretty significantly in the past 20 or more years. Just as a small side, I'll come back to what I love about Chicago, but what's also interesting to me is that if you think back about that population growth I showed after the Civil War, a big chunk of that population growth for sure was from immigration from Europe mostly. But a huge chunk of that was due to what historians call the Great Migration of freed slaves coming from the South. Well, a little bit later, because there was some hope during Reconstruction that things could have been different. But once Reconstruction was shut down, then the freed slave population made these great moves north, and a number of them came to Chicago. Now we're seeing the reverse of that. So a big chunk of our loss of population is coming from African American communities moving back south, Atlanta being a big destination. So our loss is becoming Atlanta's gain. So that's just one aside. Something you said made me think about that. But for a city as large as we are, I think it's one of the most livable large cities. It's, if you ever fly into Chicago, you see immediately like how incredibly green the city is if you come in the summertime. And so for a city with as many people as we have, and with the kind of business activity and industry, it really is an incredibly convenient city. Also, you talk about South Shore having pride in the community. I live in Humboldt Park. We have a really strong community organization, historically Puerto Rican. I love these neighborhoods that have both an identity and a pride. Pilsen with a long-standing Mexican American population, or to talk about a different kind of community. Rogers Park is one of the most ethnically, culturally, linguistically diverse communities anywhere in the world. There are something like 47 languages spoken at home in the community of Rogers Park, which is just like amazing to think about. So this is one of the things I love most about Chicago is it's incredibly livable, and it is a city made up of these smaller communities that are really great to visit and learn about their history, and so on.
Absolutely. Chicago, like I said, very rich history. Um, lots of great things to experience in Chicago for sure. What's a piece of advice you would have for the Paul students that are first moving to Chicago?
Um, I would say that the more I teach Discover Chicago, for example, they did a study of all Discover Chicago classes, and they found out that I was like one of 5 classes that traveled the greatest distance in immersion week. Um, and you really can get anywhere you want to in the city on public transportation. And so, like, learn the CTA. It's not hard. I mean, these days, when I was young, you used to have to call the CTA and tell them where you wanted to go, and then some person would be like looking up through maps and so on, and would tell you, "Okay, here's how you do it." Um, and so you really can get anywhere, and you should. And I know that, and especially well, with the current pandemic situation, people have to make their own decisions about how they feel about getting on an L or a bus and so on, and I understand that. Um, but also, you might hear in the news about, oh, this neighborhood is dangerous or that neighborhood's dangerous. And I don't want to downplay that, but I also think the news overplays that. And I think if you exercise some good sense, and you don't go in as if you own the place, but reach out to the community, and go and visit. I would encourage. My advice it would be go and see the city. It's remarkable.
And we just got a cosign from Courtney, and she confirmed that is true. That's pretty funny. That's really cool. Yeah, so you all definitely venture out in the city, and like you said, it's definitely that's something that I've observed. Being in Chicago, and I think some of it is like living here. You don't necessarily. I think I do take some things for granted. I don't think about like how walkable or how accessible everything is from Chicago. Being at
Yeah.
South Shore, I have the ability to hop on, the 126 Express, the 6 Express takes me downtown, hop on the red line, and I'm at work in under an hour, right? Coming all the way from South Shore. Like, and for folks who
Yeah.
don't know, South Shore is about 15, 20 miles south of, Lincoln Park, right? And so, that is definitely something that students could really take advantage of in terms of exploring the city and seeing all the wonders.
Well, and Corey, I mean, it can't be done for your daily commute, but if you wanted to, you could walk all the way downtown from South Shore. Um, and I mean, I live, well, I moved recently, but I used to live about 3 miles from campus, and I would walk to campus every day. I love walking as an inhabitant of a city. I think walking is a way that you experience it in new ways. I remember we moved in, and my wife works in Evanston, and she drives. And one day she's like, "Oh, we need bread." And I said, "Oh, well, I'll just go to the bakery." And she's like, "What bakery?" I said, "There's a bakery right around the corner." And she said, "There is?" And she never sees any of this. It happens to be a Mexican bakery. So not only did I get bread, but I got all sorts of cookies and pastries that I had never had before. And it was fantastic.
Yeah, that is really cool. Yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. There's definitely, I think being in Chicago as well, I think something that's cool. And I don't know, I can't say this for all Chicagoans, but I feel like you're always discovering something new. No matter how long
Yeah.
you've been here, there's just always a new restaurant, a new eatery, new pub, new experience
Yeah.
that exists, whether it's a pop up or something that's long standing. Just
Yeah.
so many things to get involved with. So we're gonna wrap up. I don't know if there's any questions that are coming in, but I just want to thank you so much for sharing and discussing Burnham's plan for folks today. It was very informative. I learned a lot. I know our viewers did as well. As we await for any last incoming questions, I got to ask you this. I got to know. Everyone needs to know. Like, where do you recommend to eat in Chicago?
Oh, well, I think one of my favorite restaurants, and Courtney has been there, is a Mexican restaurant in Pilsen called Five. It's the number five Rabanitos, which is Spanish for radish. So five radishes. Chef Alfonso, who owns and is the chef there, he worked with Rick Bayless at Frontera Grill for a while. He does some really amazing, really authentic Mexican food. The restaurant is really welcoming. It's a great place, and it's accessible if you get downtown, either on the Red Line or the Brown Line, or even Purple Line for that matter, and then get on the Pink Line and get off at 18th Street. It's right there. It's a really fantastic restaurant. So that's one of my favorite places in Chicago. I also have a couple of places that I think do some good tradition versions of stereotypical Chicago foods, but I would highly recommend Five Rabanitos.
Okay, I appreciate it. I'm gonna have to check that out. So I'm gonna look it up after we get off. But again, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed myself in interviewing you today, and hopefully I'll see you around campus once we get back.
Yeah, cool. That would be great.
All right, take care. Thank you.
All right.